We are right in that weird period of time right now between the end of the bar exams and waiting for results to come out, which will start to happen in a few weeks. And while all of that's happening, of course, we're now just in the outskirts of preparation for the next exam. So certainly lots of people are beginning to gear up and start their studies there. So it's an interesting time. And as I was going back, I found a video that I really liked. We talked about the hero's journey from mythology. And I compared the hero's journey to going to the bar exam, and I talked about the return home after the heroes finished their conquest. And looking at that mythology and the steps of how a hero returns home and what they learn and what they do struck me as being very similar to what happens to bar exam takers. So in today's message, I'm going to update that story just a little bit to talk primarily to those of you that have just come out of your bar exams, but really it would apply to anyone coming out of a big test. And then to point towards the future. Where do you go with that? What do you do with it? What happens while you're waiting for your results? You might be saying, the hero's journey, what's that all about? Actually, it comes from some information from a man by the name of Joseph Campbell. He wrote something about what was called the monomythology and the general hero's journey. All great hero stories basically have the same story arc. And in an earlier video, I talked about the first part of the arc leading up to the bar exam. And I encourage you to check that out, and we'll link to that. But one of the things that happens is that we know that there are really these two distinct groups of people that we're talking to. There are the people who've completed their bar exam, and then there are the people that are presumably going to be taking the bar exam. And as I said earlier, talking about the hero's journey really seems to be an appropriate discussion, not just for people as they're going into the exam, but for those of you who are getting ready for the exam, thinking about that process and what happens afterwards can also be very important. So I wanted today to talk a little bit about the rest of the hero's journey. Now, there were 12 steps in the hero's journey, and we're going to start actually with the reward. That's the 9th step out of the 12. So if you want to know what came before the reward, you got to go back to that earlier video. But the 9th step was called seizing the sword. And that's basically what we hoped you did during the bar exam. You overcome your greatest challenges, you transformed yourself as a stronger person, and hopefully you won the prize. Now, as we pivot towards the end of the hero's journey, if you think back to the movies that you watched as a kid that you loved, they were the ones with great heroes. For me, that's probably anything in the Star Wars verse, or The Wizard of Oz, or Indiana Jones. See, I'm really dating myself. But today, I think we could say any number of superhero movies. Now, these are classic stories, but the most classic, the classic of classics, of course, is Ulysses, and that's the basis for what Campbell talks about. When we look at the steps that Ulysses followed, what we're going to see is that there are a few additional steps to finish his journey, and those are the final remaining steps. So let's jump in, look at steps 10, 11, and 12 in the journey, and see how it applies to a bar student. Now, step number 9, as I said, was pulling the sword out of the stone. So you've taken the bar exam, you pulled the sword out of the stone, you completed the exam, and you've left the exam site. And now we're in, as I said, that sort of weird waiting period when results have not yet come out. Well, you're now in what we would think of in the hero's journey as step 10, the road back. This is essentially what's called a reverse echo of an original call to adventure that started when the hero first had to cross their first challenge, their first threshold. For those of you that are just beginning your studies, you're ready to get to that first threshold, choosing a bar review, doing your first bit of study, making a mind map, beginning to review or take sample questions, writing your first essay. Those are all examples of that first threshold. But now when we flip it, for those who are finishing, the hero is on their return home, and now the anticipation of danger that a new bar student, if you will, would be feeling is replaced with something else. In the hero's journey, sometimes we call that a claim, or it could be a vindication, or it could be called absolution, or even exoneration. I would say that the hero's journey for a bar taker and the road home is a little bit different in a sense. I think that many of you who've come back from your bar taking come back into the real world with some sense of vindication. And I hope that's what you've got. But along with that vindication, there's probably a sense of uncertainty. Perhaps there's some lack of clarity. Maybe you're not sure how your exam went and how you did. I think for most people, that's perfectly normal and natural. In other videos, I've talked about postmortems on the bar exam and how to evaluate what you've done and how you might have done. I think that in the first couple of days right after the exam, it was way too early to do that. But now, as we're getting a little bit of distance from the exam, I think it's appropriate to start to reflect just a bit and to recognize that the feelings that you had leaving the exam site and then heading back home was definitely part of the road back. But your journey, as you're discovering right now, is not yet over. For some people, the anticipation perhaps was that they were going to take the exam and then it's all done. They just wipe their hands and they go, yep, out of here, I'm finished. And it's going to be all wiped out and they'll be done. But unfortunately, those people are often surprised. When the exam is over, the tendency is to think, if I'm done, I'm finished, cut it off completely. And it doesn't happen. And for most people, it doesn't happen. I'll just tell you, most people aren't able to flip the switch and turn it off. And that becomes a struggle. It can be very frustrating and it can be a bit unsettling. So if you are frustrated, if you are struggling right now, if you feel a little unsettled right now, that is all perfectly normal. The reality is that a hero typically needs one last big push back into the ordinary world. And in mythology, that moment of coming back into the ordinary world is a big step. It's a moment in which you have to choose sometimes between your own personal objective and that of a higher cause. Now, stay with me here. What I mean by that, for some of you, is that the return to normal, daily, non-bar study life will be very welcome. It'll be very normal. It'll be very easy, and you've perhaps already settled into that groove. But for many people right now, it's not so easy. It's tough to give up all the time and the investment that you made in preparing for the bar exam. As the test has gotten tougher over the years, people have invested more of themselves in it. And so when you put so much into your preparation, it's hard to know what to do with yourself when it's all over. It causes a little bit of, and I'm not trying to diminish this in any way, but it's a bit like post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. For some people, there's a real struggle to acclimate themselves back into normal or regular life. Part of the challenge here is simply recognizing that you've just been on an amazing journey, no matter how you studied or what you did, but you are on a journey, hopefully, of discovery, and for some of you, it was an incredible amount of discovery. It was an opportunity to prove your worth and to show your ability. And then all of a sudden, in a matter of 1 day or 2 days or 3 days, it's over. It's done. And now you're sitting around waiting for someone to exonerate you or vindicate you or to affirm what you thought was true. And that makes it so difficult to wait, doesn't it? So as we come into this transition time, if you've just taken the bar exam, you're going to find that it's actually pretty common to become almost narcissistic, to feel a little estranged from the other people in your life, to not know how to explain the experience you've just had to them if they've never been through it. Or even worse, sometimes they have been through it and they've passed and you haven't, and now you're trying to justify what you did and how you did it. You might find that some of the people in your life, even now, a couple weeks after the exam, are still a little awkward and a little gun-shy around you. There's a bit of feeling timid or being tentative in the way that they deal with you, and it can frustrate you. In fact, it could make you angry. If so, it's maybe a result of the way that you were behaving before the exam, right before the exam or in the run-up to the test. This is a good time to stop and go back and actually think a little bit about that. How did you behave? How did you treat the important people in your life? How did you handle coworkers? How did you handle family? How did you handle the stressors of the world around you? Did you yell at your barista? Did you yell at your bar mentor? What did you do? And it's not uncommon for those things to have happened. And so it's going to take a while to reacclimate yourself and to reacclimate those around you to who you really are. And you need to be aware of that. Sometimes it's necessary to just stop and say, you know what, I think maybe I was a little bit of a jerk before the exam and I apologize for that. Nice me is back. I think it's important to make that acknowledgement if that happened to be your situation. One of the ways that I think you can make that road home, that journey back a little better, is to simply take the view of a higher cause, a bigger picture of you. And in order to do that, what you want to do is to frame the experience this way. You went out, you did the best work that you could do, and now it's not in your hands any longer. It is clearly not your decision to make whether you passed or failed the bar exam. That's obvious, but we somehow hold on to it as though it's still ours. It's totally up to the examiners. So what we're looking for at this point is the ability to stand back and say, I did my part and now I'm done. If you can reach an accommodation mentally with yourself about that, it makes the road back a lot easier, but it's no less significant in order to do it. But the longer you hold on to this view that it's still in your control, the more frustrated you're going to be and the harder this waiting period will become. So that's the 10th step in the hero's journey. And by the way, don't you love that we can equate a bar taker to a hero? Typically, we wouldn't think of bar takers as being heroes, but in my world, after 30 plus years of doing this, I think bar takers are incredible heroes. And the stories and the things that they've done make them ultra heroic. So definitely I want you to be aware of that. The 11th step, which Campbell calls the resurrection, is for many people the climax in which there's this final and most dangerous encounter, typically with death in a storyline of heroes. But it also represents something typically greater than the hero's own existence. The outcome in a story would have far-reaching consequences, both to the ordinary worlds and the lives of those that you left behind. The analogy for our bar taker is the time when your bar results are released. This is a time of great anxiety, obviously, for many of you. In some jurisdictions, we know the day that the results are being released, and so it's like a ticking clock waiting towards that moment of tick, 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 boom. But then in some jurisdictions, they don't tell you the day they're going to release. It's just a big surprise. And one night, just after midnight, there's a little ping in your email inbox, and there's your result. And you have no ability to prepare yourself for it. But either way that the results come out, it's a final and a dangerous encounter, to be sure. And it's going to be something that we talk about as results start to come out, and we'll give you some strategies to deal with that particular moment and some suggestions about how to deal with it. But right now, for those of you who are sitting here waiting for results to begin to be released, it's still a long way. In most cases, we're talking at least a month, but in many cases, 6 to 10 weeks before we get to that stage. I just want you to know that the sense of resurrection of, do I have this new career now? Do I get to start my new career? Do I get my life back? What's going to happen to me? All of those things are going to be dealt with at the appropriate time. The problem is you're just not there. When you succeed on the bar, and you will, certainly part of what happens is that this success, this destruction of the enemy, if you will, whatever the enemy was for you on the exam that was attacking, you emerged from this battle, this mental battle, this physical battle, this emotional battle. And we're told typically that in mythology, the hero emerges cleansed and reborn. Now, this is appropriate, I think, because in a sense, as a new attorney or an attorney in a new jurisdiction, that's what your new life is going to be like. It's an exciting time. There's going to be a great deal of learning and opportunity. There's going to be the chance to make a difference in your legal community, but a chance to make a difference in your world and your life. The rule of law has never been more important in my view than it is today. The need for new attorneys, fresh blood, people that are looking at problems in new ways has never been greater. And it is a rebirth of our profession and a rebirth of your career. And I want you to know that's out there. That moment is coming. We're going to talk about it. It's certainly worth anticipating, certainly with some degree of eagerness, but you're going to have to be patient. And that's hard. If you're in a jurisdiction like California where it takes months and months to get the results, your patience will certainly be tested. All right, the final step of the hero's journey is called the return with the elixir. Don't you love that imagery? I love this because it's the stage in which our heroes return home to their ordinary world, but now they're changed, different individuals. They've grown as a person. They've learned a whole bunch of new things. And isn't that true? Didn't you learn a whole lot as you studied for the bar? They've faced terrible dangers. Didn't you do that in facing your own demons when it came to taking a test like this? They perhaps even faced some form of death, and in our case, intellectual death, if you will. And now they look forward to the start of their new life. And in doing so, the hero brings fresh hope to those they left behind, a direct solution to their problems, or perhaps a new perspective for everyone else to consider. In our program, one of the great things that I'm able to do is to interview a few of my past bar students who were successful on the exam. We do these video interviews, and I just realized the other day, we've done more than 90 of these now in the last couple of years. And when I go back and look at some of those stories, they are amazing, and the reaction to the stories are very powerful. And to me, this is a great example of the return with the elixir. It's the opportunity for these bar takers to share with others what their particular story was. And I'll invite you to check out some of those episodes on our testimonials page, and we'll link to that. But what I want you to see is that there's a lot of information in those interviews. There's a lot of wisdom from people about the things that they learned, the elixir, if you will, that they encountered in passing the bar. Things like using photo reading and paraliminals, using the intuitive approach to multi-state bar taking, studying less hours but more effectively, the elixir of learning to let go of memorization and use repetition, the elixir of using mind mapping to study rather than flashcards or some of the other older devices. These are the wisdom that come from people who've been successful. And that's something to look forward to. I had a lot of conversations with bar students in my course right before the test in which I said, picture yourself doing an interview with me after you pass. Get that idea firmly in your mind. Look forward to it. Know that it's out there for you. Now, I want to just say that while we're not at the point of results today, I want you to know that those of you who do succeed on this particular bar exam have come back as different people. But all of you have grown from the experience, whether you passed or failed. I think that in your heart that you've learned a number of things, both substantively about the law, but also in terms of yourself, about your strengths, about your fears, about what you can and can't do. Some of the great stories that I hear are from people who don't pass initially, but begin to discover that they had abilities and strengths that they didn't know, and they build on those and move towards their goal. All of you who take a bar exam face some extraordinarily difficult times, whether it's emotional or financial or time-wise or just the fear of the unknown. But the point is we do it because we want to look forward to a new life. Obviously, I also have to talk about those who do not succeed on the bar, whose results are not favorable. We certainly have plenty to say about that, and we've got different messages in our course and different ways that we'll be talking about that. Your journey will simply cycle back around and you'll make another run at the sword, the reward that comes from seizing the sword. That will happen. Just know that for those who are successful, their journey will ultimately culminate more by what they give back and what they're able to share and demonstrate, both as members of the bar and as passing bar takers, and that will be your future as well. It's a lot of fun for me to work with students going through and leading up to the bar exam. And when we get to this interim point, as I said, it's an odd time for me because I've just finished working with all these people who were at the end of their journey. They were really heroes. They had so many skills and abilities. They were confident and excited, and they're really ready to seize the process. And then I cycle back to the beginning, and I've got the very first steps for students as they're starting out, the fear, the anticipation, and so on. But it's always an interesting process to move from this into now the waiting, and then the start for new people who are just starting to figure out what they're going to do. But for those of you who finished taking your bar exam in the last few weeks, congratulations. I want to say that before results come out, because what you did in getting to the exam, taking the test, doing your best work is a great accomplishment. I want to invite those of you that took the exam, settle back into the world. Keep your mind on things other than the bar exam. Results will be here soon enough. We'll be talking about that as we get closer to all those dates. We'll share that information. But I want you to know that it's okay now to let go of the bar and to start to work and think about the rest of the world. And for those of you that are just starting your journey, know that we've got an exciting journey ahead of us. You're going to learn things about yourself. You're going to learn things that you didn't think you could do. You're going to push yourself in ways that you never imagined possible, and you will get to go on this journey, the hero's journey, and see and reap the rewards. Thanks for being with us today.